Okay, this is the second of the swirl flap delete videos that I'm putting together. You can see on this one it's still a V6 TDI engine from an Audi, but instead of having the base map, which is this one here, with perhaps one adjustment map or correction map that might be air pressure and another one nearby that perhaps might be on this side that might be temperature or something, you can see that there are in fact 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or more different bits and pieces that all look as if they're related to the swirl control. I mean, that looks like the base map, and that looks like it could be a correction, or it could be another version of the base map. Again, that could be a correction, these could be corrections, and these could be other versions of the base map. Now, there is an element of fiddling around when it comes to trying to delete this type, simply because of all the choices. If you've got a Damos, it's okay because you can look them up for your particular car and you can check exactly which ones are which. Usually what you find is that if the little peaks drop right down to the bottom, then they are correction maps, and if they sit in the air like these are doing, like this, sit up from the bottom, then they are probably versions of the base map which will be used under certain circumstances. You can't always tell this. The best way obviously is to go and look at the numbers, because the numbers tend to be the giveaway. But usually the fact that they don't go right down to zero again gives you a clue that there is a base value that you could use as your method for turning off. In other words, down here somewhere, instead of 0, you would have a number that you could use, and that number is usually 50%. Now, to make these easier to see, I'm just going to use the usual thing. I'm going to double click on here and then just accept it. I'm not going to fill in any details, so I'm just going to say OK, and it will just be called a map. So there we are, map, and I'll do the same with that one and the same with this one. I'm just doing this because that way, when I go to the text view, I will be able to see anything I haven't selected quite easily. So I'm not doing it because I want to select things, I'm doing it because I want to see what I haven't selected, which sounds a little bit daft, but you'll see what I mean in a moment. So there we are, we've got that whole collection that all seem to be related to swirl. Now if I go over to the text view, you'll be able to see more of why I did it that way. Now there's the last one. There's what is probably the base map. You can usually spot this one simply because it's bigger than the others, but also the values. In other words, if we assume that these are actually percentages, then we've got values ranging from 20% to 80%. So we've got a reasonable spread of values. Now again, the reason I did this was if I now go back through here, with luck I will see a blank spot. There we are. Now that blank spot there is the exact same numbers that was on the last video when there were only 3 maps, and it's the same set of numbers that you find when there are no swirl maps enabled at all in a 4-cylinder engine that's got this area but the maps are not enabled. So you tend to see that regardless. So you never really want to fiddle with those numbers because they seem to be what's being used as the default setting when everything else isn't working. So they will be your default settings when you turn something off. Right, now on top of that, if we go looking around at the end, you will see that there is not an obvious, and on the previous video that I did, there was a sort of obvious region or an area where you could say, oh, that's probably a switch. These files do not seem to have an obvious switch. In fact, they don't seem to have a switch at all. So there is nothing here. There is no little giveaway to give you a clue as to say, oh yes, this must be a switch and we can switch these off. So very often these files have all the elements of the previous file, but they don't have any kind of switch. Now again, if we look at the beginning, sometimes we can see other versions of these maps in two-dimensional form. In other words, if we come back a little bit away from here and we start searching back, and we'll find that, look, there's something 5, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 temperature settings, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press K, and I'm going to accept that as a potential map, and they look like they're temperatures, so I think that's probably a 2D correction for temperature. Just press delete to get rid of the highlight, and just have a look and see if we can see anything else that's hiding in here. We've got something here that's 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, but 1, 2, 3, 4, they're all values of 0, so that doesn't look relevant to what we'd want to do. Now here we've got 5, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they look very much like they are air pressure. So if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and again press K, and it looks like we've got what is probably some kind of corrector for air pressure. So again, and I'll just press delete to get rid of that. Now it's possible that if we dig around in here we may see something else, but I can't see anything obvious on this file, so I'll stop there and just stick with what we've got here. So if we look at, well, what adjustments would we make? Well, we saw on the previous file that these adjustments may as well be zeros. So if we just put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros in there, enter, it will ask us if we really want to do that. Yes. Okay, right, so that one's now been set to 0. And if we do the same for this one, we've got highlight up to there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Enter, so that one's now been set to 0. Now let's have a look at this one. This one's got a few odd adjustments in it. It's difficult to say for sure, but it looks like another corrector, just like they look like corrections. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop back and double check these. You see, now that one I think probably is a corrector. That I think probably is a corrector. Now these, it's just possible, are working similar to that, but under different circumstances. So those it might be worth having a closer look, but these two will take as being correctors. So what we'll do is we will just go highlight down to there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, enter, and then the same on this one, we'll go down to there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, enter. Right, there's what we think are going to be our default fallback settings anyway. Now if we have a look at these, when dropping back, if we assume these are percentages, it's all 40% and 20%. Alright, let's have a look at this one. This one's 20%, 80%, 75%. This one's 20%, 80%, 75%. Similar sort of thing. Let's have a look at this one. This one's, again, it's difficult to tell, so let's go back and have a look at this one. Now this is the last one, and you can see the way this one falls right back. So again, this last one, I think that we should just set that one 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros, enter. Now from then onwards it becomes slightly more complicated, and this is where you may have to use an element of trial and error. Now in theory the whole thing will eventually, if you set everything to 0, will default back to these values, but there is, like I say, an element of trial and error. So what I tend to do at this stage is I tend to go for the fallback position of what is used in files that do not have swirl flaps enabled, and that value is 50%, which reads as 051230. So I tend to put that one in there, and then when I come back to these, like I say, this is where the trial and error comes in. But if I think, and again I'll go back to this view, if I think that these would typically sit somewhere around about here, and it looks like that one, you see, set at 50% might be a bit high. It looks like it might want to sit down here as a a standard bottom value. So what I do is I look at those and I say to myself, yeah, I wonder what the file will be most happy with, because what we want to do is reach a situation where we won't trigger any more errors than we absolutely have to. So let's go back and look at this one and say, well, what if we were to set this one at, let's say 200 or 20%, 0, 2, 1, 2, 3, set that all over at 20%, and then let's go back and have a look now. Now we've set the level at the point at which the bottom level was before. So in other words, we flattened it and all the peaks are gone. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this one, and at that one, look, 20%, that one looks like it's going to be 20% as well. Let's have a little look along it. The only one that looks like it isn't looks like this one. So let's go and have a look at this one and go over to text view and have a look. Now that one looks like it's a mixture of the two, doesn't it? It looks like it's sat at 20% or 40%. But so again, what I'll do with this one is I'll sit it at 0, 2, 1, 2, 3 noughts, enter. And that's in fact what I'm going to do with the rest of these. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make them 0, 2, 1, 2, 3, enter. 0, 2, 1, 2, 3, enter. 0, 2, 1, 2, 3, enter. And then that one looks like it's the one we did already, and that looks set at 0. So if I go back and look at these now, let's move those along across there. It's not obvious what values we've set these on, but the little blue signs are telling us where we've actually made a change, and being blue it means we've reduced the value. But that one, there's the value we've reduced it to, and we know that's 0. That one has been reduced to a flat 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%, 0 and 0. And these have been reduced to 0 as well, these little two-dimensional maps. And so what I would do is that would be, as far as I was concerned, the flaps are off. And the reason that I would start and try it like that first is just in case the file has got buried in it something that sets a flag as soon as these values drift too far, and it could be that they've been set at a minimum somewhere of say 20%, or that could be a maximum of 20%, but it's possible that there is a 20% value in there somewhere. So it's possible that if we were to set these all to 0, we would immediately get an error. Now you can never be 100% sure with these, because sometimes people set these things all to 0 and it's fine. And then other people try setting them all to 0 and the car immediately flags up loads of errors. So I would always go to possibly setting it at 50% and see what happens. If that doesn't seem to be doing what I want it to do, I would consider going down to 20% like I've done here. And I would even consider going down to 0% and giving that a try to see what happens. But generally speaking, you can usually get away with setting, like I say, these ones that seem to be correctors all at 0, and then these either at a low figure of something like 20% or a figure of like 50%. That is usually fine, and it usually doesn't trigger any extra errors. But of course you might get errors related to the faults you've already got. In other words, if it's already reporting errors as a result of problems that you've already got with the flaps, then obviously those errors are not going to vanish like magic. You will then have to sort those out by going through the error codes and coding out those particular errors. So that's a completely different thing. Now there are other ways of actually intervening with this other than just changing the maps. You can change these maps, and there are other ways of intervening to try to stop the errors showing in the first place. And what I'll try to do at some stage is put up a video for those. The only problem with looking at the other methods is that pinning down the exact point in the file that you need to change is considerably more difficult, because you really need a Damos to be able to pin down the exact location of the changes you want to make. If I just make a generic video, that will only get you into the correct region, but it won't actually say here's the exact value you need to change to make this work. You would have to get to that area and then make changes on your own until you found ones that were successful. And that trial and error approach is obviously not for everyone. And once again, just a word of caution. I mean, please don't just change these things so that the car looks okay, so that you can sell it to some unsuspecting mug, because that's not what these videos were made for. The best thing to do is to delete all the problems and then strip out the bits of the mechanics that you don't want, so that there is not going to be a situation where a piece of one of the flaps gets sucked into the engine, jams a valve, and then of course the pistons will hit that valve, or several pistons will hit several valves or whatever. But it can do incredible damage. I've heard some very nasty stories when this has occurred, so don't put yourself or other people in that position if you can help it. Right, I'll stop at that point on that one.